Welcome everyone. Welcome to the fourth session online workshop, which will be held by Mulgajat Ambrose. Mulgajat is a teacher trainer. She's a member of Macmillan Education teacher training team. And today is the fourth session, which will be devoted to Plan B. So I think we all need to be flexible with our lessons if it's needed. And today we'll learn how to use our prior experience to recycle excellent lesson plans and how to make anticipated problems part of your lesson. So over to you, Gosha.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I see there's a lot of people again from different parts of the world. I like our meetings so much. They've been quite regular. I like them so much because it's almost like traveling without traveling. So welcome everyone from, even from Toronto, Canada. I've been to Toronto. My brother lived there. So we have, it's really international, intercontinental, right? Excellent. I'm speaking to you from Hamburg, from Germany, which is where I'm based currently. And in lockdown, so I have no plans to move out of here. Now, this is something that I did not foresee, that I wouldn't be able to visit my family in Poland, which is where I come from. But sometimes things like that happen. We cannot foresee everything. And we're going to talk a little bit about it today, but in a totally different context, because we're not going to be talking about traveling, but lesson planning. So today is our fourth session in the series of Plan Your Lessons Like a Star webinars. And in the previous sessions, we already talked about some key principles of writing a lesson plan. We also talked about planning reading lessons. And in the last webinar, 3 weeks ago, I believe, right? I'm confused. I don't know anymore. Time flies, but also behaves differently in the pandemic, right? So we also talked about planning lessons for fluency. And today we're going to talk about having a plan B. So being prepared, being always prepared. And I'd like to start with a short anecdote. I like to start with anecdotes because I think they kind of show a lot. So a couple of years ago, back in 2014, I was taking a CELTA course for teachers. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's quite a difficult course. It lasts for about 4 weeks, and there's a lot of learning how to teach, and there's a lot of lesson planning, and every second day you give a lesson and you're observed by your tutors and you get feedback and so on and so forth. I was very, very much into it. I was really engaged, and I spent a lot of time and effort preparing my lessons. Now, the thing about CELTA courses is that at some point there is a visitor coming from the organization, and they're supposed to supervise our lessons, and they observe one person because there are many tutees. So they observe one person and they just check if everything is according to their standards and so on, so forth. So there were 5 people taking the course with me. So in total we had, 6 people, and they only had to observe one lesson. And guess who was the lucky one to be observed by a very important person from a faraway country? That was me. And I was really stressed because I didn't have that much experience. And I was really being observed. It's always a little bit stressful. Maybe not nowadays. I like being observed. Actually, I like getting feedback. But back then, it was a bit of a nightmare for me. So I was giving the lesson to a group, B2 level. It was a group of adults. And, I had all my activities planned, a very, very detailed lesson plan that I had spent hours preparing. So I had almost a script of what I was supposed to say. I don't do it anymore, but back then it was really, important to me. And at some point, there was this task. It was free practice part of the lesson. And there was this task in which my students were, I asked them to stand up. They were just speaking in pairs. And I decided to use this moment, it was in my plan, to wipe the whiteboard so I could write some other things. Now, above the whiteboard, there was a clock, a glass clock. And I was so stressed, and I was wiping the whiteboard so with so much energy that unfortunately I hit the clock. Now the clock fell on the floor and just broke into small pieces. Everyone suddenly looked at me, and just to remind you, I was being observed by a very important person, right? Who was not my tutor, so they didn't know me. right? So I did not panic. Surprisingly, I did not panic. I just said, okay, guys, that means it's time to, get back to your seats. And I just turned it into a bit of a joke, I guess. But I was really stressed. And then my tutor said, well, you see, these are the things that you can put in the anticipated problems rubric in your lesson plan. Of course, it was a joke because, spoiler alert, some things just can't be unseen. We cannot predict and foresee all the problems that we might encounter during our lessons. There are just, some things that might happen and we have no control over it. So I would never have thought of, like the possibility of breaking the glass clock. Or, for example, that the AC would go off in the middle of the summer, would break down and stop working, and my students wouldn't be able to concentrate because it was just too hot in the classroom, right? So there are some things that happen, and there's no way we can predict them. For example, natural disasters. I mean, sometimes, we're being warned, right, by the media. But of course, like, these are not the things that we should think about when we plan our lessons. So this is a little bit too extreme, I believe. So, floods, explosions, if you happen to live near a volcano, or like tornadoes, our global pandemic, who would have thought, right? And here we are over a year in. Also, that some of our students might come to the classroom a little bit sick or feeling a little bit under the weather, or, for example, that suddenly there will be a blackout or there's no electricity, the projector doesn't work, all these things. They don't happen very often. So I think that most of the time it's just a good idea to ignore them, right? But there is also the good news, which means that some things can be foreseen. For some things, when we give our lessons, we can be prepared, and we can actually prepare different methods and different ideas of how to deal with them. So today we're going to talk about planning lessons and anticipating some problems that might occur, so we don't end up being super stressed and panicking in the middle of the lesson because something goes wrong. And as you know, some things sometimes go wrong, and they always will. There is no escape. I hate to break it to you, but there is no escape. And sometimes things won't go according to our plan. But I do believe that if you have a good lesson plan, most of these things can be avoided, right? So let's start with the first thing I'd like to talk about, which is how to be flexible with your lesson plan. Now, I am sure that most of you, if not all of you, you write your lesson plans. You have, the stages, you have the procedure. Maybe you do what I used to do. You write the script, especially if you're a beginner teacher, and that gives us a lot of support. You write the timing, you write the materials. Maybe you write very detailed lesson plans. Maybe they are shorter. My lesson plans used to be very 3 pages for a 45-minute long lesson. Now is just 6 points and some scribbles, some notes, because most of these things I have here already. But what I want you to take from this webinar is how to write these lesson plans so you can be flexible when something happens in the lesson. So it's not about being flexible, with what to pick, but it's more like, if something goes wrong, how to quickly, on the spot, adjust to the new situation. For example, suddenly there is a fight between 2 students, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you've encountered so many problems. We could all write, we've got over 500, almost 600 people here. We could write a very, very thick book about it. So the first thing that I believe is really important is that in a good lesson plan, you always have both extra activities and some activities that are the very base of your lesson, but still you can omit them if you wish. So, for example, when you have a reading lesson, let's say when you have a grammar lesson, and then you have, the stages, and then you have, let's say, in controlled practice, in the stage, you've got a lot of activities, and you always have these extra activities saying, if time allows, I always say ITA, if time allows, I can also do this on that, but I also put some marks next to the activities that I want to do in my lesson, but I might not have enough time for that, so I can quickly omit them. So then when you look at your lesson plan, you've got everything there, right? So it's kind of easy to be more flexible with it. And something very important here is that being flexible does not necessarily mean omitting some lesson stages. Now, as some of you know, some of you have attended the previous webinars. Some of them maybe are here for the first time. You're very welcome here, and don't worry, I will explain everything. But in every lesson, we do have some stages, right? Because we want our lessons to be well thought of. We want them to be effective. Therefore, we need to have this, intro to context, warmer. We need to have a little bit of restricted practice so our students can practice accuracy, but we also have this freer practice so our students can practice fluency. And of course, it depends on the lesson, because it might be a grammar lesson, and then we probably want to put a little bit more focus on controlled practice, restricted practice, but it might be speaking lesson in which we want to put more attention to practicing fluency. But I think, and I do believe, that in each lesson, no matter what you put your focus on, there have to be these stages, so the lesson is well organized and it simply makes sense. So being flexible does not necessarily mean that you omit any of the stages. So let's take this lesson. It's a very, very general staging, right? And of course, it might be slightly different. I'm sure we would all have maybe some different ideas about it, in a sense that maybe would add more steps or maybe would reduce some. But these, I still believe, that are the very core stages of every lesson. And here comes the first problem. Usually when you give lessons, I believe that working with young learners, the lessons are about 45 minutes long, sometimes 60 minutes long. But if you could just write maybe in the chat window how long your lessons usually are. I assume it's about 45 minutes, although I also know that with online lessons, they tend to be shorter, and sometimes it's even 30 minutes or 45, 60. So I would say everything between 45 and 60 minutes. So as you can see, 6 steps for 45 minutes, that's already a lot, right? And then you start giving a lesson and you find yourself in this situation. I'm pressed for time. I've got these 6 stages. I have planned everything very thoroughly. And suddenly I look at my watch and I go, oh dear, I'm running out of time. I'm left with 5 minutes for free practice and wrap up. How am I supposed to do it? Especially because free practice is usually even more important than controlled practice. It's much more challenging, and we practice fluency, and we want our students to be fluent. So when we are left with no time for free practice, that's not very good, right? So, but sometimes you realize at the very beginning of the lesson, you've done the warmer, and already after, the warmer was supposed to take you 5 minutes. That's what you have in your lesson plan. But I don't know, the kids were sleepy. I don't know, someone interrupted your lesson and entered your lesson. You see, this also happens, right? Someone might enter our lesson, maybe the school principal, because there's a very important announcement. Or maybe suddenly, I don't know, someone threw the ball out the window and it broke. Of course, it's quite, it doesn't happen very often, but it might. And our lessons might also get interrupted. So, I don't know if you agree with me here, but what I used to do in such situations, when I thought okay, so it's I planned 5 minutes for that, but it's been 15 minutes already, I started to panic. Usually, I don't do it anymore, but it took me a lot of time to learn not to panic. What I used to do was, okay, so I have spent too much time on the warmer, so I'm just going to skip revision. They've learned it already, right? So they should remember. And then the context is important, and I'm going to do controlled practice, free practice, but maybe not to wrap up. Because free practice is the most important thing, right? So wrap up, okay, they're just going to go home. They're going to be very happy when they hear the bell. So they always are, right? Our students. So we just skip some parts. Now, that, I'm afraid, is a trap. And I think you might agree with me. Could you please write in the chat window if it ever happened to you that you had a lesson plan, something interrupted your lesson, and you just skipped some parts of it. Yeah, so I see that all of you, right, it happens often, right? Sometimes, I don't know, maybe a kid, our student lost their pencil case and there's a big drama, the big drama, and we have to deal with it and so on. So then, we just we panic and we skip these things. Now, what would be the consequences of skipping the revision part? What will be the consequences of that? Let's say, okay, I panic a little bit, I'm going to skip the revision. What's going to happen? Right, I'll wait for your ideas maybe, all right? If you could write some ideas. So you don't do the revision. Oh, an insect in the class. Yeah, a bee or a wasp or a hornet. I'm scared of hornets myself. Yeah, they will make more mistakes, and maybe they also can't the students can't follow the lesson, they can't use the vocab. Now revision, this is something they have learned already, but it doesn't mean that they have learned it forever, and it's such an important part. And also, before the whole series of webinars, we collected some requests from you, and many of you said that sometimes your students just don't remember what has been taught before, and that's why revision is super important, as most of you say. Yes, you can transfer it to the next class, but that doesn't really solve the problem, right? Because in the next class, the same thing might happen. Plus, in the next class, you might want to revise something you're teaching in this class. So yes, it does happen. Sometimes you can, like, maybe you decide if you have classes, let's say, I don't know, 2 times a week, or like 3 times a week, maybe you can have one bigger revision once a week instead of having it in every lesson, although I do like to have it in every lesson. And also, one of you said that some students might have been absent in the previous lesson. And then here's the trouble. They were absent and they have no idea what's going on. And sometimes we need the language from the previous lesson in the new lesson because we're in the middle of the unit and they have learned vocab and now they're going to be learning grammar. And in the examples, you're going to use the vocab from the previous lesson because the context of the whole unit is the same, right? So, yeah, so skipping revision, as you can see, so many concepts, like basically skipping revision makes our lives more difficult. We don't want that. Now, what about skipping the wrap-up step? How do you feel about this? Because wrap-up is like, it usually takes just not so much time, right? We skip the last sentence going like, okay, thank you very much. So this is what you've learned and I'm so proud of you. Maybe some praising, right? This is the wrap-up, right? Or maybe some goodbye routine, like giving high fives or guessing the words in flashcards or something. And yeah, as you say, the lesson is not finished properly. So they might not get it right. I mean, I think the biggest problem with skipping a wrap-up is that, first of all, wrap-up, it can be one sentence, really. It's just to finish the lesson. So as you say, this lesson might leave this impression of being unfinished. I don't know if you ever had this situation when you work, for example, in a cafe and you ordered your coffee and you're sipping your coffee and there's this one last sip at the very bottom of the cup. And then the waiter or the waitress, they come and they assume it's empty and they take it away from you. And you have this kind of like, oh no, there was one more sip there. And it's not even that you needed to drink the sip. It's more this syndrome of something unfinished. And I think this is extremely important to just wrap up this lesson and to just give our students this comfort of something being finished. So then they leave the classroom and they can get distracted with whatever they want because they have already, like they have already understood that this part of their day is over and they leave the classroom with some new words, with some new grammar. There's a lot of, like this reflection here, right? So, okay, so I have learned something new and they get the full picture, right? So I do believe that this stage is extremely important. But still, the problem is that I have spent 15 minutes on my warmer stage and what now? Like, I only planned a couple of minutes for that. What do I do? Like, what now, right? So a very easy solution you can apply here is simply something that I actually do quite often with bigger groups, and usually with bigger groups, it's a bit more difficult to estimate the timing because, and sometimes you have groups of, I don't know, let's say a group of 6 students, and whether you have 6 or 4 in the class, it doesn't really change much. Sometimes you have groups of 30 students, right? And I think we have all, like at least the majority of us, we've taught these groups of 30 students, and then it can, so you assume you're going to have the even number of students, but then some people don't come, so you have the odd number, someone has to leave to the bathroom in the middle of the lesson, and so on and so forth, right? So this is what I do very often. I just blend the first 2 steps together, because why not combining warmer and revision? It can serve both purposes, right? So if you do this, you already save one step of your lessons, right? And you see, like 13, 15 students, that's a lot of students already, right? So this warmer, especially if you have some TPR activities, it might be quite time consuming, right? And you want to be very careful with that because, of course, you don't have that much time, especially at the beginning of the lesson, because the interesting parts are happening in step 3, 4, 5, right? This is the main body of our lesson. So let's have a look at an example. Let's have a look at an example. So this example comes from one of the lesson plans that you got as a handout in the previous, after one of the previous webinars. So that was about reading, and there was this reading. Maybe some of you who weren't in the present webinar, maybe you teach with Academy Stars and you're familiar with the story about the red bus that goes around town, and there's a video, and so on and so forth. So the original plan of this lesson was, first I have a warm-up which goes which is playing Let's Go There by Bus, and students, they say some sentences. My name is, I am, and then you put some feelings, and then I want to go to all right, and the whole class says, let's go to by bus, who, and we run around the classroom in circles and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is a warm-up, right? And then the next step is revision. And because it's a reading lesson, and I have already pre-taught some key vocab from the text, because I was doing it over the last, I have been doing it over the last 3 weeks, or like maybe 2 weeks, all right? So I don't have to do it in the lesson. My students already know it before reading. So I have this revision in which my students will recall this vocab, these secret words. And it's very important for me because without this, they will not understand the text. So what I do is, instead of having these 2 steps that take about 10 minutes, as you can see, so warmer is about 4 minutes, revision about 6 minutes, revision about 4 minutes, I look at the aims. And the aim of these 2 stages, both of them, are, I want to boost the energy level because it's a lesson at 8 in the morning. Everyone is sleepy, me included. We're all like a little bit like zombies. I want help my students switch to English. Okay, that's why we do the warmer, because they've just come to school, and I want them to be in the right place in my lesson, and I want them to recall some pre-taught words. Okay, so this is the most important thing here. It's not even about what we revise in the warmer stage, because the actual revision is the words that they're going to use in reading. So what I do is, in a physical classroom, I prepared some flashcards with the names of places around town, and I turned them into some sort of stations, so I just put them on the floor around the classroom, and under each flashcard, I hide another one, either a flashcard or maybe a word card, depending on what you have pre-taught, with the vocab item that is actually my target language in revision. So the key vocab from the text, right? So once again, we have these stations, we have the place around town, and under this flashcard, we have the hidden word. So they cannot see, they know it's there. I tell my students they cannot see it. Now, the first student approaches a chosen station, and first, they have to say where they are. So I'm on a bus stop. I don't know, I'm in the cinema, right? Depending on what your stations are. The stations can also be animals, right? And you can say, we're in the zoo. And you can say, okay, I am with lions now. I'm with zebras, or whatever you want to do, right? Whatever you want to revise. Okay, so places around town. And then this student, when they have already said, I'm on a bus stop, they take the hidden card, they read the word, or if they can't read yet, they look at the picture, and they have to either read or say the word out loud, showing a chosen emotion, right? So for example, the word is top floor. This is one of the words that we will have in the reading. So I really want them to understand the differences between the ground floor and the top floor, because it's about a double decker. So it's kind of important, right? So for example, and the student chooses they choose their emotion. So for example, my student has chosen the emotion happy, and they have to say top floor. And then the rest of the students, they have to recognize the emotion. So for example, say, oh, happy, happy. And they have to repeat the secret word with the same emotion. So then you've got the whole class saying top floor and smiling. Or if the emotion was, for example, worried, they can say top floor And then the whole class is like, oh, worried, top floor, right? The students would usually choose emotions, to my experience, usually choose emotions like happy, sad. Sometimes they'd be very dramatic. They're like, the top floor, because, this is funny, right? So then some students say, oh, crying. Now, this is not really an emotion, but that's not my target vocab here, right? So you can just do this. And if you do it online, there's also a way of dealing with it online, because what you can do is there are so many applications for free in which you have these flashcards. You click on it and you see the back side of it, right? So you can take the station and on the other side of it, the target vocab. So instead of spending 10 minutes on warmer and revision, I basically achieved the same aims in 5 minutes. Right? I have revised what I wanted. I save 5 minutes of my lesson. Now, 5 minutes, as you know, a lot of time, right? So the first problem solved. Now, if you look at your lesson plans, you can see that there are many stages that you can blend together, right? So warmer revision, or maybe freer practice with wrap up. Maybe you can try to blend them together, right? Maybe it's possible. Or maybe controlled practice and freer practice. Maybe you can just try to, make a two-stage, like a task that has 2 stages. And the first stage of this game, let's say a game, would be controlled practice. And the second stage would be freer practice. So you have one bigger activity, right? Instead of 2 or 3 smaller activities. And it saves you a lot of time. And if you think about these alternatives, this is something you can actually plan ahead, right? So you can write a detailed plan and you can just circle some stages together, having, somewhere in your mind that these stages might take a lot of time. And if that happens, I'm just going to do this. You don't even have to write it down, although I do recommend it. I personally do write it down sometimes, usually. But even if you don't, even thinking about that already saves you so much stress, right? So I do encourage you to do it. Like when you have written your lesson plan, or when you're reusing your old lesson plan, because maybe last year you taught a group and now you teach the same group. The problem is that last year the group consisted of 10 students. Now you've got 30 students. So, the timing is not going to be relevant anymore. Look at it. Don't write new plans. Take it, blend some stages, and you're all set. But this is not the only problem that we encounter. So let's say, let's focus on the freer practice stage now. Problem. I planned the activity in my classroom, but there were some last minute changes because someone had to take my classroom for whatever reason. And then I had to move to another classroom and I don't have my equipment. And I don't know, my students, they have their backpacks in yet another classroom, and moving them would be like, a little bit too messy. They're going to lose everything. So I end up being in a totally new classroom without things that I need for the activity. And just to give you an example, this is the activity. So it's fluency practice based on the song. So it's going to be dialogues. So we have listened to the song. You can play the song from your phone or from your laptop. So that's okay. You can take it with you to the new classroom. But then the activity goes as follows. Write the phrases from the song on the board. And the phrases are, can you see a kangaroo? No, I think there's a camel over there. So this is something we talked about in the previous webinar, but it doesn't really matter, right? It could be any activity. And then students work in pairs, and each one gets one flashcard with an animal, and you write these phrases on the board. So you already see that you need the board and you need flashcards. Now, the problem is that I am in a classroom where there is no board. Oh, there is the board, but no markers. Or they have all dried out, right, whiteboards, or there's no chalk or whatever. And I don't even have my flashcards with me because I left them in the other classroom. I don't really have time to run between classrooms, and I'm very unlucky because my classroom is on the ground floor and the new classroom is on the second floor. You just don't have time for that. I can't leave the kids. I'm in trouble, right? So you have no board and no flashcards. So let's have a look at what we can do. So the task requires flashcards. So I use them to assign animals to kids, right? I see that it happens. You say that it happens. It sounds familiar. Of course, it happens to all of us, right? So if you think you're very unlucky, you're not alone in this. There are over 600 people here. We've all been there, right? So I need the flashcards for what? To do what? To assign animals to my students, and I need the board for them to see the dialogue, so the phrases we're going to drill. So what I do is, instead of writing the phrases on the board, because I cannot do that because I have no board or I have no markers, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spend a little bit more time. The time I would spend on writing them down, I'm just going to drill them. And also, if you have a laptop with you, you can also write them very quickly in the text file and, change the font from 12 to 200 and you can show it to your kids, right? But you can simply, if you don't have your laptop with you, that also might happen. And also, if you can do it on your phone, but it's kind of a little bit too small, right? And you are very, very unlucky you don't have a piece of paper, like there's no scrap paper, like, the classroom is empty, there's nothing there. So what you can do is simply drill it. And then originally there were 2 phrases and it was supposed to be a dialogue, but because of what happened, I'm only going to drill 1 phrase, which is, no, I think there's a camel over there. So I spent about, let's say, 3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes drilling this phrase, like, no, I think there's a camel over there, right? And you can use a lot of gestures. Now the classroom is empty. There are no desks, no chairs. So you have a lot of space for some TPR. So you can do this drilling with TPR. Right? Or you can say slowly and then faster and high pitch, low pitch, and so on and so forth. You can spend about 2 minutes on that. And then instead of distributing flashcards to assign some animals to my students that they would pretend to be, or that they would talk about, I simply ask them to sit down, relax, take a deep breath, and imagine this animal. And not only do I say imagine this animal, I would say, how big is it? What color is it? Like, I would spend like about a minute. So I'm sure that they are imagining an animal, actually. So you see, they already have their animals without flashcards, right? Without the flashcards. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk around the classroom, maybe tap like one student's shoulder, maybe point to a student, or maybe for bigger classes, they do it in pairs. And I would ask, also, if you've only drilled one line of the dialogue, maybe doing it in pairs could be a bit challenging. So I'm going to have my students, I'm going to ask them, like in front of me, I'm going to ask the question, can you see a kangaroo? Points to a student, and then the student, based on what they have imagined, say, no, I think there's an elephant over there. Then I go to another student, say, can you see an elephant? And the student says, well, no, I think there's a penguin over there. And then I take this animal, go, can you see a penguin? No, I think there's a cat over there, and so on and so forth. So basically, I've done the same thing, right? I've drilled the same phrase. Well, 1 out of 2, but still 1 is better than none, right? And we have drilled a lot of animal names. I have used the animals they've given me to ask my following questions. And I have drilled the vocab I wanted. I have drilled the grammar I wanted. And I did it with no resources whatsoever, right? So class saved, I believe. I hope you agree with me, right? So even though you had no board and you had no flashcards, you managed without them. So I believe that when you have written your lesson plan, it's always good to have it somewhere in the back of your head that, okay, what if I have, like, you have this plan, and what if I don't get my resources? Because this can happen always. And I think based on what you're writing in the chat window, it happens to us quite often, right? And as you say, necessity is the mother of invention. Yes, and I'm sure that all of us, we've been in these situations. And this is a moment, one of you mentioned that before, that we have to improvise. We have to be very creative. Yes. And sometimes we will still encounter these situations and we will not always be prepared. But I do believe that thinking about it prior to the lesson saves us a lot of stress, because even if you do have to improvise, kind of, it's like sort of like half improvisation, right? Because you have thought about it before. So it's like, okay, I was really hoping for this not to happen this time, but it did. So I'm going to improvise a little bit, but I had this idea. So instead of flashcards, I'm going to do this. And instead of the board, I'm going to drill. Okay, I'm all set. No panic, right? So the only thing you have to do is just think about how to do the same tasks with no resources. And again, you can write it down, but I think the more often you do it, the more natural it becomes. So maybe at first it's a good idea to just write it down. Eventually, with all the tasks, you already have ideas, because you can always replace flashcards with imagination, right? So, of course, using flashcards is much nicer, and using imagination is also great, but it's good to have some resources. But like every time you have a task with flashcards, think about how to replace them with imagination. Is it possible? Maybe if it isn't, maybe I should put an extra task there in case this happens, and I cannot replace the flashcards with imagination here, right? So I'll have this extra task in which I can do it, right? Okay, so one more problem here, controlled practice. My students work extremely slowly today. It's a very slow day. Their pressure is just extremely low. And I'm also a bit slow today. Like, we ran out of coffee in our canteen, and the topic seems to be quite challenging. So it's, there's so many things just went wrong. Slow students, no coffee, and quite a difficult task, right? And what I do to avoid such situations in which I am running out of time because of controlled practice, because it just takes much more than I have, and I do not want to skip the free practice stage, because this is the most important stage for me. I'd rather skip controlled practice and put more attention to it in the next lesson than skip the free practice. But still, I still have enough time to do some controlled practice. So what I do to avoid it is, before the lesson, when I'm planning it, I have a look at all the things I have. And you have a lot to choose from, right? So you have the student's book, in which you have this one controlled practice activity, which is on the left side, activity 2, look at the pictures, complete the sentences with the past simple verbs. But you also have the workbook, in which you have not one, but 3 tasks, right? 3 exercises. And as you can see, they are different length, and the level of difficulty is also different. And you also have digital resources, and you have 2 more tasks, and one would be writing the words, one would be correcting 8 mistakes in 4 short dialogues, right? So we have a lot to choose from. So what I do is I have a look at everything, and I assign timing to it. So I know that the task in the book, the exercise in the book, is going to take about 6 minutes. I know my students well enough to know it, roughly 6 minutes. Of course, it might be plus minus 2 minutes, right? But roughly 6 minutes. But I can already see that in the workbook, there are some long, the activities, the exercises are going to be more time consuming. So 8 minutes, 10 minutes. With the online activities, it's 7-9 minutes, more or less, right? So what I know before the lesson, before I have given it, and before I've even planned it, is I know that for my restricted practice, for my controlled practice stage, I can choose from 6 different exercises, and some of them longer, some of them shorter. So depending on how fast your students work, you can prepare sets of different... Wait, something has changed. Sorry. You can prepare sets of different activities, all right? So for example, my plan A is to do this activity from the student's book, because I like it a lot. It's going to take about 6 minutes. But I see that, for example, I've done everything so quickly, because now, let's say the problem is opposite. My class works really, really, really fast. And I see that I still have 35 minutes left, and I'm already moving on to freer practice. I need some more time here. So I know that if they work faster than I assumed, I can either add an activity, or I can take the most challenging activity, which is the one that takes about 10 minutes. But if I'm running out of time, I'm going to choose the shortest activity, the easiest activity, which is, in my opinion, with my class. For my class, it will be different for different classes. It's going to take about 6 minutes, is the one they have in their student's book. This I do before the lesson, before even planning the lesson. So I'm safe, right? Because I have different options to choose from. So I'm not surprised by the timing, right? So speaking about that, because I've already mentioned using some past lesson plans and recycling them, right? And I do believe that if you write good lesson plans, I don't want to write one lesson plan for one lesson only. I want to be able to reuse my lesson plans, to recycle my lesson plans, because I've put a lot of effort into designing them, and so much thinking, so much energy. I just want them to be, sort of versatile to some extent. So let's talk for a moment about how to use your prior experience to save some time and effort while planning the lesson. So I'm tempted to ask a question: how big a pile of materials and lesson plans on your desk is? My pile is, I think, about like this size times 3. These are my past lesson plans. I used to be very messy, so they used to be all over my place, and then I decided to organize them, and I put them in files. Yeah, quite big, right? We have a lot of these. And cupboards of the bedroom. Yes, I can totally relate to that, right? So, and sometimes we have them on our computers. I think it's maybe a little bit easier to organize them on our computers. Not always, though, right? If you're not good with folders, then it might be a challenge. So let's have a look at an example. So this is a lesson plan. Again, those of you who have already attended some webinars from this series, you're probably familiar with that. You might have seen it. It's a lesson plan about the fluency lesson, right? And this is my fluency practice. So this is all my free practice. And as you can see, I have 3 stages here. You already know that if it's too much, as you can see, this plan is quite like full of content. If it's too much, you can just, get rid of some activities. But if you have a look at the column on the right, I have some space for comments there. And this is what I write in my comments. For bigger classes, put students in groups of 3 as they work, and as they work, walk around and monitor them. So originally, the activity was designed for a very small class of, let's say for a group of 12 students, right? But next year, I might have a group of 30 students. And if you put this comment there, and that's the only thing you do, when you recycle your plan, when, let's say, a couple of months later, you look at this plan, you don't have to think about what to do with it again. You don't have to remember because you already have it in your notes. All right. Same. If you design an activity for big groups, make a note how to deal with it, what to do in smaller groups. My another comment here, for bigger classes, prepare a set of 6 flashcards per pair and skip the part in which a chosen student imitates the animal. See? So then I just read the instructions that are quite detailed here because I put a lot of effort into writing this plan. And then I have a comment. And then the only thing I have to do to recycle is take my old lesson plan, read the procedure quickly, and the more detailed it is, the more I understand from it after a couple of months, and then read the comment. Okay, but for big classes, okay, I'm just going to skip this and that and replace this with that. Okay, I'm done, right? So, so that's what you can do. And again, one more time, remember to be flexible within stages. So here, this is my fluency stage. This is my free of practice stage. And again, because in my lesson plan, I have put many more activities than I'm capable of having in one lesson, I just am free to cross out whatever doesn't suit me, right? If, let's say, the first 2 activities are quite similar, if I see that the first one, my students do not respond to it very well, they're kind of like maybe a little bit bored, they don't like it that much because there's not enough running, I just don't do the second one and I just do the third one. Right? But another thing you can do to recycle your old lesson plans, now that is quite a long process, but you can get back to your old lesson plans and have a look at them and actually do it, is simply prepare a game bank. Now, of course, you already do have the game bank in your teacher's books, right? In Academy Stars, at the beginning of teacher's books for each level, you have this very long game bank. You have a lot of games. And also, if you look at these lesson plans in your teacher's books, there are also many games. Like sometimes they send you to the beginning of the book to the game bank. Sometimes they write some comments, right? Now, what you can do is, while working with your students, check out all the activities, all the games from the game bank. I always do it. I check out all of them because I know that not all of them would be good for my students. Some of them would just work fine with them. Some of them, my students would not necessarily respond to them that well and they wouldn't like them. That doesn't mean that some games are better, some games are worse. I think they're all great. It's just that, it depends on the size of your students, the age of your students, the relationship between them, the atmosphere in the class, and so on and so forth. So what I do is I take the Scotch. I'll look if I have it at hand, but I'm afraid not. But I do have these, the Scotch is colorful, is very easy to remove. And I just put stickers on games and I just write stars or sometimes number when 1 means 2 means 5 means great. And for each class, you can have different symbols, or for each class, you can have a different color, right? And then let's say I have this activity body clocks. And with my class, it didn't work that fine. It was maybe a little bit too challenging. So what I do is in my teacher's book, I just put the sticker there with 2 stars with my yellow group. They don't like it. So I'm not going to do it very often because they don't respond to it that well. But the very same group loves disappearing sentences. It's their favorite, all-time favorite activity. So I just put 5 stars there. And then when I write my lesson plan and when I want to choose the activity for free practice and I'm not feeling very creative, I want to use my teacher's book because I have it. It's great. I should use it. Why should I do the same job twice? You just open the game bank and everything is color-coded. right? And you can do the same thing. So you just, without thinking, you just look at the 5 stars, right? And then you see which one fits your lesson best and which one is, best for your grammar lesson, which one is best for your speaking lesson. And then you just adjust it to the topic, and that's it. The whole work's done, right? So as you can see, it's kind of a long process. You have to observe your students, but after a couple of classes, you already have your resources here. And what you can do is you can do the same thing with your lesson plan. So you have a lesson plan, and this is where you can also put these stickers with stars. I mean, of course, you can just note it with the pencil or whatever. I like to put colorful stickers because then it's very visual, it's color coded, so I just look at it without thinking, and I know, right? Or you can assign each color to the way your students respond. So red is like and yellow is like nee, and green is yay, right? So you can just do it. I usually just put stars because it's the easiest for me. So have a file, have a notebook with the activities that worked fine in your lessons. What I used to do was I used to copy, like when I had the game bank in my students' book, I would teacher's book, I would just copy it, cut out the activities, right? And divide them into the best and the worst. I mean, the worst, like it doesn't sound well, right? But the best and those that didn't really work, or those also that didn't work, but I still want to use them because I think they're great. And I just have to figure out how to make my students like them. So maybe divide them into stages and so on. But you can simply use the teacher's book and keep it in your teacher's book. It's just that I wouldn't always carry the teacher's book with me. So I just sometimes I'll just copy, so I can put it in, it's just one sheet of paper and I just put it in my file and then I have it, right? So first have it organized, have it in your notebook, then rate them. And also remember that it's not only rating, you can also write comments, because some activities would get 5 stars, but only for small groups. And the 1-star activity for small groups would be a 5-star activity for big groups. So this is what you can also do. Now, it takes some time, but you don't have to do it in one day. You can just do it over time, right? You can just decide, okay, this year, I'm just going to do it throughout the year. And then by the end of the year, I will have prepared my excellent game bank that I can use for forever, really, until I retire, right? So another thing is that I really encourage you to keep the activities well organized and categorized, right? So some activities would be great for spelling, some for fluency, some would be energizers, some would be coolers, some would be both, right? Depending on how you categorize them, right? So I see that some of you write that you do have these notebooks. I also have it, and I really recommend having such a notebook because it's just great. Like, you've got everything in one place, and then it's just so easy, because then when you plan the lesson, you can pick easily 3 activities, right? And then you just put them in your lesson plan, and then you can be flexible with the lesson plan. All of these activities have been rated 5 stars, so you know that no matter which one you get rid of, it's still going to be a great lesson for your class, right? So yeah. And also some of you say that you write some letters in your lesson plan. Yeah, of course, you can do it. Like, you choose your own method. This is just an idea. This is what works for me. But of course, you can use some symbols. You can write longer notes if you feel like, because why not, right? So I really encourage you to do it, because because of that, you will avoid some problems in the future. For example, my students do not respond well to some activities, some exercises. There you go, problem solved, right? So if you anticipate these problems, you're prepared for that. And if you even you're doing this exercise with your students and they don't react well, you can just make it shorter or quickly say, you know what, guys, I see that you don't like it that much, but I have a better idea. How about we change it a little bit? And then you just pick another activity, another exercise that you know is more fun, for example. So you're very, very flexible here, well prepared for whatever happens in the lesson. So let's have a look at some other common classroom problems, okay, and how to tackle them, which I called Weather the Storm, because I'm sure that we can really be prepared for most of them, and we can really we can manage in most situations, and there is no reason to panic. Although panicking is a big word, but being stressed is also something very natural, and it's also, I think we all have to embrace the fact that it will keep happening, and but hopefully just occasionally, hopefully not as a rule, right? So the first very common problem, very low energy level. The way I solve it is I simply, in my stages, because I'm flexible and I know that I can, get rid of some activities because I have foreseen them and I have marked them in my lesson plan. I add energizers to the warmer stage. This is what you can do. Because I have my notebook with my ideas and I have a lot of energizers there, I'll just use it. So you see, it's like the whole thing. So the first one is I'm going to spend more time. So I'm going to use my notebook with my game bank. And it's very easy because I have energizers on one page. So I just pick one. Then I am going to spend more time at the beginning in the warmer stage. Therefore, I will have less time in the next stage. But because I am flexible with my lesson plan and because I have foreseen it for whatever reason, maybe low energy level, maybe someone interrupting my class, I know very well how to deal with it. Right? Because I already know in my lesson plan, I just see it and I can just get rid of some activities, no stress at all. Right? And the same you can do with high energy level. If the level of energy in your class is very, very high, you can see, that it can also be problematic, right? Because we're supposed to teach, we're not supposed to, like entertain, and it's not like we're in the, circus and everyone has to have fun all the time. There need to be these moments with lower energy so the students can focus and they can reflect on their learning and so on and so forth. So when the level energy is very high, you would use the same thing. You would do the same thing. You would use coolers. And usually coolers, because they're sort of like slow motion, right? They will take a bit more time, but I'm prepared for that. You see, so this is like the big picture I'm trying to build here. See, like all of the parts of the webinar now make sense put all together, right? Sometimes there might be some conflicts in the class. Now, this is something that is kind of hard to predict, but I usually assume that there will be some conflicts in my class. Not in every class, but if you work with young learners, oh God, sometimes I don't know if it ever happened to you. I had two boys and they came to school and they had the same toy. It was like Action Man or something like that, the same toy. What a drama it was, they started to fight, like who had it first and so on and so forth. And when such conflicts appear, I am prepared for that. And I'm not prepared for the conflict. I don't know what conflict's going to appear, but I'm prepared for that in a way that I know that sometimes when the conflict is strong, I will have to take a break and solve it before we continue with the lesson because it's distracting to all the students. So I might need to take 5 minutes and say, okay, guys, right? Let's take a break and now switch to my native language, my students' native language, and just, deal with the conflict. It takes 5 minutes of my lesson, but I already know how to save these 5 minutes because I have a well-prepared, flexible lesson plan, right? And it might happen. So sometimes you just have to be prepared. I think like class conflicts is basically the same as as someone interrupting your class. You just have to be prepared that someone's going to take away some time from you. And with a good lesson plan, with a flexible lesson plan, you are prepared for that. So no stress at all. And sometimes what happens is that there's still some time left. So for example, you've done everything and you saw that your students work really fast, so you added more and more activities, but they're super brilliant today. I don't know, they drank a lot of milk in the morning and they're super strong now. I don't know. So there's some time left. And the way of solving it, as I'm sure you all know, and that's probably what you do, is simply either taking some more activities from a game bank, like, those that your students like, and you can also go like, oh, you know what? This is your favorite activity. Let's do it. Or what you can do is you can actually spend some time with your students voting on the activities they like the most, let's say in this unit. Okay, so you have your old lesson, like you have, I don't know, I usually keep like my lesson plans in a file and I have, one plastic sleeve for one unit, right? So I just put all the lesson plans there. I go, okay, so look, this is what we've done. So which activity was the best? We're going to vote, and we're going to vote with our bodies. If you liked it, the jump. If you didn't like it, roll on the floor, So like, you see, so you do some TPR and you also get this immediate feedback from your students, right? Because one thing is what you observe, one thing is what your students feel. You can also tell them like, okay, so I would like us to play a new game that we haven't played before, but I need your help for that. Do you like playing with flashcards? Like you can have this short discussion if you have a couple of minutes left. Why not, right? Or you can simply reach out to your lesson bank, to a game bank, and then just, pick an activity. Or you can say, I've got my game bank here. So now you close your eyes, all right? Or what I sometimes did was like, I would close my eyes, open it, and the students, they took my hand, and they had to move my hand to the activity they want to have. And that's how we would just pick this activity, right? So also, another thing that I encourage you to do is write down the most common problems you have to face in your classroom, and also write down the solution. Now, this is what I did in the CELTA course when I was learning to be to become a teacher. It was this, skill, like the course, you're probably familiar with that. So in every lesson plan, I would actually write down, there was this section, anticipated problems. I wrote it down and I had to write down the solutions. Now, I don't do it anymore, and there will be some problems, again, that I won't be able to foresee. But if you do it with your most common problems, that already makes you feel safer, doesn't it? Right? So why not? Write down 10 problems, write down 10 solutions, or for each problem, 2 different solutions, right? And that should make you feel safer. And that, also saves you a lot of stress. And on top of it, the most important thing is relax. All right? I'm going to let it... I'm going to leave it here for a moment. What I mean by saying relax is you're never going to foresee all the problems, right? This is just like, we're not superheroes. We're superhero teachers, but not superhumans, right? Something like you do your best anyway. So sometimes you will have a lesson which is not excellent, and it happens to all of us. The fact that the lesson is not excellent and not full of fireworks doesn't mean it's a bad lesson. I mean, still, it can be an excellent lesson to which your students wouldn't really respond that well. All right. So sometimes some things are not dependent on you. Don't take it personally. If your students go like, oh, this lesson is stupid. I don't know. In Poland, students tend to be very straightforward. So if my students say, I hate you and I hate this school and the lesson is stupid, I used to take it quite personally, in a sense that then I would go home and say like, oh my gosh, like this lesson was terrible indeed. What did I do wrong? Don't do it. Just do your best, plan your best, and relax over it, okay? And if something goes wrong, also relax. Take a deep breath. Your students would understand. Tell your students, you know what? This I haven't foreseen. So what can we do about it now? How about we play some more games today, right? If you don't know, suddenly you have to work without the book and your whole lesson plan is based on the book. And I don't know, your students, like they just like all left their books in another classroom that someone has locked and they cannot enter it. Take your game bank, just play some games. It's also an English lesson. Well, there will be some catching up later on, but it can also be a good lesson. So I keep my fingers crossed for you. I'm sure you're going to do fine. I really, really encourage you to think about some problems and that might happen, foresee them and include them in your lesson plan. The more you do it, the easier it becomes at the end, and you're just not stressed anymore. And I would like to thank you very much. Thank you all for participating. I hope you find these ideas useful. I hope I've convinced you to start using them. Start on Monday. Don't wait until the next year. Start on Monday, because by the end of the year, you will have already built quite an impressive game bank if you haven't done that yet. So thank you very much. And also thank you for all of you who have attended all the webinars. Thanks to those who have attended some of them. Thanks to those who have joined us earlier today. I am speaking here is such a pleasure and such an honor. So thank you very much also to Macmillan Education for inviting me, and fingers crossed for the next year. I hope it's going to be face-to-face. I think we all missed that. In case it isn't, be strong and relax, right? So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Gosha. So I think we are extremely happy and lucky, and so to have you. Thank you for your 4 webinars, which were full of ideas, which we can easily implement into our own classroom settings.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think I'm also very lucky to have to work with such great teachers, and you guys are just incredible. Like you've got so many ideas. You always, write them in the chat window. Thank you so much. It feels great, and I'm so happy to be the part of the team, really. So thank you from the very bottom of my heart.
Yeah, and I would like to to say thank you to all the participants from all over the Central and Eastern Europe. So thank you very much for your active participations. And by the way, some of you asked about the certificate or worksheets. So first, check your spam folders and then contact your local representatives, either Macmillan Ukraine or Macmillan Slovakia or Macmillan Czech Republic. So
and also one thing, I'm very sorry, like one thing I forgot to mention, guys, is that after this webinar, there's also you will also get a handout that I've prepared, and in the handout you'll have some anticipated problems, how to solve them, and also some variations of activities, just to show you an example of how you can put them in your lesson plan. Sorry, I forgot to mention that, but it's there, and I believe it's going to be sent with a certificate, right?
So thank you very much. Thank you for your thank yous. So dear colleagues from all over Central and Eastern Europe, yeah. So hope that next year we'll have Gosha face-to-face or mask-to-mask probably. Okay, if you got any questions, so don't hesitate to ask in the chat box. So if not, have a good weekend and stay safe. See you. Bye-bye. Yeah, we're looking forward to the next series of online workshops from Olga Zhata. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.